College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Mark Lehman.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Normalize It Forward. My name is Mark Lehman, and this is the podcast that talks openly about mental health and wellness. On today's show, we're joined by Rob Thorsen, founder of the Shoulder Check Foundation. Welcome, Rob. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Rob. I would love to start things off if you could maybe tell us a little bit about the Shoulder Check Foundation that you run.
Yeah, for sure. So it's just the reason that kind of puts us together here today. So
Right.
I kind of give you the context for what we're up to. So our program's called the Shoulder Check. We're kind of more formally the HT40 Foundation, where we started, and we're on a mission to kind of help young men and women make contact with one another. It's pretty straightforward, and I think the best way to say what we're trying to do is, you never know who might need a hand, but we all have a hand to give. And our thought was, the more people we can get checking in on one another, the more likely we are to catch someone who needs some support and give them the space and permission to say they need it.
What a great way of saying all of that. That's fantastic. And I've definitely looked into, on my end, a little bit about your foundation, and I'm so impressed with what you guys do, and all of what you just said. And I agree 100% with absolutely everything you just mentioned. Tell us a little bit about how it came together.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of things sometimes take their inspiration in kind of moments of tragedy and that kind of thing. And my son, Hayden Thorsen, so he's the HT40 in the HT40 Foundation. His number was 40. He was a hockey player. He died by suicide in May of 2022. And when he passed, of course, the world turns upside down and you don't know which way to go. But as we were kind of navigating that, there were a lot of conversations that were happening at the time, whether it was parents related to us or kids asked us directly. They said, who's going to do what Hayes did for us now that he's gone? And it just took not very long to realize that what he did was he put his hand on people's shoulder. That's what he did. He was a hand on shoulder guy. I happened to be walking down the stairs in my hallway, just like everybody else. You got all the pictures from babies all the way up to the current moment in time. And as I kind of scanned them one day, I looked across them, and since Hayden was 3 years old, there wasn't a photograph where he didn't have the people around him within his arms, right? Like, that's literally what he did. He put hands on people's shoulders. And so that kind of became the point of inspiration for what we're doing here, which is nothing more than, what I like to think Hayden would have been doing himself if he was with us, which is just look after people, put hands on shoulders. I think what was so striking about that for so many people was, like, Hayes was a big guy, right? Like, he was an athlete. He was all that stuff. He was 16 years old, 6'3", 200-pound guy. So he had a presence that most people didn't have. So you noticed him for that. I think you would notice him, but you remembered him because even though he was the big guy in the room, he was the one who was just aware of where other people were at. And that made an impression on a lot of people, and obviously on me and in my life. And he is then in turn the inspiration for what we're doing here. He was the check-in guy, and we're trying to help kind of spread that and teach other people how to check in.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, so sorry for your loss. Really a tragedy. And he sounded like an absolute amazing human being who, in so many ways, as I talk to parents, Rob, reminds me of that adage of, like, kids teach parents so much, right? And he sounds like he was really an inspiration. I heard you say on an interview once that you guys are working at bringing vulnerability and connection closer together, which I think is awesome. I think it's such a great way of saying.
Yeah. I think that was, so we kind of, thank you, and I appreciate that. Like, that's what we kind of started by saying, like, there are a lot of great organizations in the world, right, working to help bring mental health and wellness to the fore and helping in moments of crisis, right? Like, I'm not a by career, I'm not a practitioner. I
Mhm.
obviously couldn't identify a moment of crisis when it was right beside me. I'm actually an advertising guy. My background is in marketing and advertising. I used to run an ad agency. And that's actually kind of the path that led to how we got to this idea and why it's built the way it is and what we're trying to do with it. So, when another thing that happened around the same time, we were going through the first few months of this, I happened to be working with an organization in my professional life, national organization that is about kind of health and wellness, youth empowerment, so on and so forth. And I was having a conversation, just kind of looking for what should I do. And the person I was talking to said to me, it sounds harsh, but it took me a second to like turn a harsh statement into a positive thing. She was like, you kind of need to leave this to the professionals. I was like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? And then I reflected on it, and it was kind of like, okay, you're right. Like, I am not a mental health practitioner. That's not my profession. I'm a marketer, I'm an advertiser, a brand builder. So then we just kind of pivoted, and we thought, like, what if we could build a program or a brand that was based on selling kindness and empathy, for lack of a way of saying it, like, there are a lot of organizations out there, and the language, it's starting to come into play, breaking down stigmas and all that good stuff, saying things like you are not alone, or it's okay to not be okay. But the thing we realized is a lot of that messaging is still putting the burden on the person who is struggling to raise their hand and break through that and say, hey, I need help over here. That's that vulnerability thing. So our thought was, if we could enlist everybody into the conversation, get more people checking in, it'll make it that much easier for the person who is struggling to hopefully say, or to answer that question honestly. How many times in my life, if you were to say to me, how you doing today? Like, I 99 out of 100 times, like, yeah, no, I'm good, man. But like, there have been a lot of times where I've not been good over the last few years. And very seldomly would I ever actually share that. And even that was a personal experience with it, right? Like, just creating space. And now I find in doing this, like, that's what the shoulder check is there to do, right? Like, get everybody involved to help give permission to be vulnerable. Every time I go somewhere and have a conversation now, I'm amazed by the conversations I find myself in, whether it be like between you and I, between me and adults, peers that I've known my whole life, or even more powerfully with the young men and women that we're kind of building this program for. It's been pretty incredible.
It's amazing, Rob. And you're touching lives. I think you're being vulnerable. I've always said, vulnerability breeds vulnerability, right? So like when you put that out there, and I have to clarify too, I am a practitioner, and I'm the first one to say, like, the amount of people out there that are suffering is up here. The amount of us, we're down here. Like, not enough of us. So guess what? You know what? Maybe people disagree with me on this. I don't really care, but we got to band together. There's things you can offer, I can't. There's things I can offer, you can't. And I think together we're stronger. And what you've tapped into here, and I'm so glad you have, is, that notion that's being overlooked, because how many, especially men, right? When they're approached, how you doing? Just give that canned response. When the harsh reality is that, if you look at the statistics, most people are dealing with stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, that tracks back to that. What was it in 2021 or 22? I guess spring of 22. Then the Surgeon General published that study, said we're dealing with this crisis of loneliness and isolation, and that's kind of where we anchored our idea. I think about it in terms of being like pre-intervention or upstream from intervention, trying to catch a few more folks before they slip through the next level. And, I know it's more in your professional parlance than in mine, but like this notion of like paths of despair, there's that first step. There's this impetus of starting to feel alone or depressed or suffering from anxiety that then manifests itself in different paths, right? Like, anything you force in is going to come out one way or another, whether you want it to or not. And that could be in behavioral, it could be in addiction, it could be, all those types of things. And then, God forbid, suicidal ideation, thoughts, so on and so forth. So our thought was like, if we could just maybe try and lend a hand, for lack of a better way of saying it, a little bit further upstream, and, hopefully just maybe clock a few spots where people could use a hand. And then, of course, the job to do there is to bring in a professional, or to get a parent, a teacher, or to get somebody on the phone, all those kinds of things. Because, we're not qualified to solve the problems, but gosh, if we could identify a few of them before they get worse, I think that would be a positive contribution.
Huge, life-saving, huge. And, I think you said it well, Rob. For so many of those kids, they're alone, and they're alone with some monstrous ideas that are way above their pay grade, right? Yeah. So, my feeling is that, you said it best when we first started talking today. Any individual is able to lend a hand. And boy, I'll tell you, when you reach out and you have somebody look back at you and go, nobody's ever asked me that.
Yeah.
Or, I really appreciate talking today or anything like that. It feels good to help. And, so many individuals out there, all they need is an ear, right? Someone to listen to them.
Yeah. Just get that conversation started.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, our mission, we give ourselves as the HT40 Foundation, that of course gave rise to the shoulder check, is to create as many ways as we can come up with and put them out into the world to help people make contact. So we say, reach out, check in, make contact is kind of our tagline.
Love it.
Yeah, make contact is like the most important language we have in what we're up to. And if we give that as our mission or our brief to ourselves, and I'm very fortunate, in all the people that have come out and helped build the shoulder check so far, whether it's my son's world of hockey, which has, we've got support all the way up to the NHL there, to my and my wife's professional network, where we have kind of our previous organizations, ad agencies who've been giving themselves to this pro bono for years now. Everybody just kind of pitching in to create ways to help people make contact.
It's awesome. Can I ask, because I'm interpreting that phrase, make contact, and I'm thinking in my head, in some ways, both for adults and for kids. I know you mean, sort of literally touching base, but I guess I'm wondering, tell us a little bit more about where that space is, like make contact. Tell me what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, I think when this idea first started, literally I had made some notes in a notebook and a little tiny bad sketch because I can't draw anything.
Me too.
Yeah, it was just two people sitting side by side. One person had a hand on the other person's shoulder.
Love it.
One side it said, "I need a hand," and the other side said, "I have a hand to give."
Love it.
And that I did, we are both always in both of those roles. Yeah. Right? Like we are capable of extending a hand, but also always in need to whatever extent. And this idea of a hand on a shoulder, I think, is really powerful and universal, insofar as a hand on a shoulder can be everything from congratulatory and celebratory without having to say a word, to encouraging and motivating, pat it back like you got this without having to say a word, to also in a moment of consolation without having to say a word, meaning I'm here for you. So much can be conveyed in such a simple way without ever having to search for the words, but saying everything that needs to be said in that simple moment. And if we can, I mean that literally, but also figuratively, of course.
Yeah.
Because you can make, obviously social media, right? It's, of course, a hot topic, and there's so many things that are wrong with it. And there are so many negative or detrimental impacts and effects. But at the same time, surely there's a way to build positive community in that. And we can use it to do that, right? Maybe they've built platforms with bad algorithms that take you down rabbit holes that you shouldn't be going down. So let's not do that. And let's find a way to make it turn in a positive way and build community that way. So, last year we launched an emoji that we created, which was the make contact emoji, which was just an outstretched hand with a little blue heart that would let you start conversations, that you could receive that and see it. It means okay, you're thinking about me in a more meaningful way than in a thumbs up or, let's give that meaning and let's use that as a way to start conversations. And, we're working on new things now with our kind of creative partners, where we hope to launch new things this year. We have our flagship, which is coming up. Our flagship event is called the Shoulder Check Showcase. It's in Stamford, Connecticut. It'll be July 24th this year.
Great.
And we have about 2,000 people come out. And we have 30 NHLers and PWHLers who come out. We play this kind of charity hockey game. But this whole thing came together originally. This will be our third year now. The first year was we invited 2,500 people in. and kind of, it was an experiment. So before the main game started, our host or MC is Dave Maloney's former Ranger great, came out, and we created this moment where we asked all 2,500 people to put their hand on the shoulder of the person next to them and do like a call and repeat. I promise to reach out, check in.
I saw the video of this. This was great. Powerful. It was great.
Yeah, and it was. And it was it was a bit of an experiment, but it was learning for me. And we all experienced it real time together because no one knew that was going to happen. And it changed the mood in the building. Like, incredible. Yeah. And even people walking out, they were like, what? It was palpable. And I think it just kind of proved to just the power of genuinely connecting with someone, and mostly strangers talking to strangers, right? Like, hands on your shoulders. It was a cool moment. So that's what we kind of try and replicate in everything we do. Like I said, both figuratively and literally. So as the shoulder check spreads, and we've touched, gosh, I don't know now. I was just making a list because we're, updating all our, you're always updating your stuff and your emails and website and whatnot. And I've got 100 entries now of different programs and organizations. And every one of those programs is touching between 100 or 1,000 people.
Amazing. Amazing.
A lot of people putting a lot of hands on shoulders.
It's a lot of shoulders, Rob. That is a lot of shoulders. That's great. That's amazing. That is, gosh, that is, well, let me just ask before I skip over it. How can people get involved? Because you mentioned you're big.
Yeah, totally. So our website is just shouldercheck.org.
Okay.
We've got a section in there. It says, I want to bring the shoulder check to my community, to my team, to my organization, to my school. And there's everything that we've done is archived there. You can see what everyone's done in the past. And that website is just meant to be a place for inspiration. And you can see how other people are using it. And then there's some downloadables and instructions, and you could bring it to, like I said, whether it's a team, whether it's a town, whatever. Because I think, I say this a lot, like the shoulder check, it's an interesting place to operate, right? Like my one point of reference for what I hope the shoulder check can be, because aim high, right? It's might not.
Yeah, of course.
But like everybody knows, the month of October, the world turns pink, and Susan G. Komen raises tens of millions of dollars annually, hundreds of millions of dollars annually for cancer research and women's health issues. And then the guys from Movember who kind of took the lead there and said, okay, let's do that for men's health initiatives in November with the mustache and the color purple or lavender, whatever that is. So our thought was kind of like, what if we could turn the world, it's kind of blue aqua color of ours in September, and let that stand not necessarily for raising money for kindness, but raising awareness for one another.
Love it.
So love it. Do. And the shoulder check should be the kind of thing where, like, it's an ingredient, and you can use it however you see fit. Like, hey, man, I could bring that to my band. I could bring that to my part-time job. I could bring that home and talk about it at dinner, right? Like, it can go anywhere anyone wants to take it. And I talk about it a lot. It's like, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and an idea has a beginning and then it evolves. And this is an idea. It's not a story. And it's meant to evolve based on whomever gets involved in it, right? Like, it'll go where people are compelled to take it. And, it's kind of our job to help support that, not tell people what to do, but rather hopefully inspire them to see ways they can use this in their own way.
What a great concept. What an amazing, amazing, amazing concept. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned, Rob, that I think I want to highlight just for a moment for my listeners. You had talked about creating an emoji. And I had the thought when you said that, I'm like, okay, so many teenagers are worried about their friends, right? And yet they'll come into my office and they'll tell me about it. And then I'll say to them, have you told anybody?
Yeah.
No, you're the first one. You're the first one I've told. And there's that awkwardness. There's that notion of like, we're two teens and I'm worried about Rob. Do I say anything to Rob? Well, I don't want to upset Rob, so I just don't say anything. And yet an emoji is such a great way to communicate care and concern, right? And so I just want to highlight that for my listeners in that, teens clearly communicate differently than we do, right? But in many ways, you guys have figured this out. In many ways, it doesn't matter how you communicate. As long as you're communicating, as long as you're letting that person know I'm here and I'm concerned about you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had this, I kind of came onto this line of thinking for myself and for what we're doing here. There's that like duality that exists. You can think your way into a new way of acting, or you can act your way into a new way of thinking.
Right. That's right.
Sometimes I just find myself here doing this, or people asking questions, or like, hey, could you come speak to XYZ? And, it's not my goal to be any kind of speaker or to be in front of this, but I do understand that there are times where I'll have to kind of maybe help people take the first step. And that's cool. Yep. I'm there for that. So I had the chance to go speak to a high school about 2 weeks ago or so. And there's about 1,200 kids there, which was great. I'm thinking to myself, wow, what an opportunity to inspire people with this idea. Mm-hmm. But then it also had me thinking, of course, like, okay, this is a slightly different room than we've brought this message. We've done it in all over the place, right? With large groups and small groups and that kind of stuff. But this was the first time it was in kind of like this type of high school setting. And I got to thinking a bit about like, well, okay, so what's different here? And I had this, I think to the point you were just making is like anything else, communicating in this way or being able to kind of broach this topic, like it takes practice and you have to learn how to do it again. And I was thinking, okay, so now it's a learning environment. Like, let's practice this. Let's learn how to do this. And they had this really cool thing going on where I just had 1,200 kids turn to one another. I was like, repeat after me, but don't say it to me. Say it to the person next to you. I could use a hand. Like, say the words out loud. Like, practice it. Build this skill and this strength. Just like we study for a history test, or we go to sports team practice or band practice or whatever. Like, we have to learn these skills. And I think, for a lot of us, like the ability to express oneself is innate. Just go back to the 3-year-old on the ground in the supermarket who wanted the Fruity Pebbles and can't have them, right? Like there's nothing holding that kid back from it just all coming out. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's what we kind of lose over time when we become more self-aware. We worry what other people think. And that's where this notion of being guarded and not allowing the vulnerability and that kind of stuff. And I was just kind of thinking like, we just got to relearn those skills. Like we got to practice them. So we have a lot of stuff in our toolkit now. Like we have these little cards that we bring with us everywhere. That I check in my loved ones' buzz. Yeah, and this was something we did with PWHL Sirens. But now we do this virtually everywhere we go. And it's just another way for people to practice like saying these things and using these words, or getting comfortable stepping into those moments like you're saying, like, hey, are you okay? Like, hey, I have a hand to give. Give people different ways, tools, access points to kind of relearn the skill. And that was kind of like a bit of a breakthrough moment for us, because just this idea of like having to relearn something that we intuitively understand but lose time. And, of course, it's even now for us, right? Like more self-actualized adults, like, yeah, okay, you kind of come through that and you become a little bit more comfortable with who you are and expressing yourself. But even there, it doesn't always come back easily for everybody.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I like how you said it. It is a skill. It's something you build up. And as a therapist, I'm practicing every day talking to people, and so I have to periodically remind myself, hey, everybody is sort of in a different space when it comes to this type of stuff, and probably one of the best compliments I've heard, and it meant a lot, was when I first started this podcast. I got an email from a mom, and she was thanking me that we had done a show. And as she expressed in the email that she was able to talk about mental health, the topic of mental health, with her 15-year-old, because they listened to it in the car on the way to practice one day. And I thought, how cool is that? Like, so we're normalizing the conversation. We're helping people understand the importance of, instead of avoiding the subject, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it in a comfortable way. Maybe talking about it means listening to this podcast. Maybe it means, practicing some skills that they get a presentation that you did. But to me, it can't be nothing, right? Mm-hmm. Because life keeps moving and kids are dealing with a lot of stuff nowadays. They're just dealing with a lot,
That's what I think too. Like I see it each time we have the opportunity to go and talk to people or share the message. Like it's the kids that are carrying our idea forward. And yeah, of course, there are a lot of great supportive adults and coaches and administrators along the way. But equally, like I've had people in those roles say, no, we're not going to do this. And it's been a kid, not to me, it's been a kid who's brought it forward to a coach or an organization. And they'll, no, we're not going to do that. Or no, that we'll have to take that to our board next year. And I think to myself, wow, like that I'm sure that's not just as it relates to shoulder check, but kids who are like stepping forward and saying like, here's this positive contribution I want to make. And there are people stopping them from doing it.
Imagine that.
I can't get my head around it.
Yeah.
Like, that's why every time, 99 out of 100 times, I default to wanting to speak to the young men and women who I know will spark to this idea and carry it forward, right? That's how what we're doing will grow, but it's not meant to be our idea. As a matter of fact, not only, this idea, as I mentioned, inspired by my son, but in the aftermath, we had 40, 50 kids at a time over our house, and we worked on this idea together. Or I went to, I'm in Darien, Connecticut. We have a place called the Depot, which is a place for like community. And we've been there together and working on ideas, and incredible moments that we've had where we've just kind of built this idea together really powerfully.
That's awesome, Rob. That's amazing. Rob, can I ask a tough question around this topic? And I'm imagining my listeners might be thinking to themselves, unfortunately, you guys have been through a tragedy, and through that has come this amazing, as you said, idea, right? That has just touched so many. Parents might be wondering, like, when these things do happen, or a child is starting to slide, right? And whether it be, let's say, a mild type of depression or a mild type of anxiety, what are some things that they can look for? What are some things that they can be aware of in their world? And really, probably most importantly, what are some things they can do?
I mean, I think, like you say, that is a tough question.
Yeah.
And of course, I can only answer that. And I say this all the time from my own personal experience.
Of course, yeah.
I don't know better than anyone else. And I ask, what is the right answer to that question? I think, like, look, if 50,000 people, young men, women, walk a path that leads to that final decision, they've walked 50,000 different paths. And in our instance, if you made a list of 50,000 people, I think Hayden probably would have been 50,001 on that list, which is its own, specific instance. But I suppose it's also, there are commonalities or archetypes, right, of these types of things. I mean, certainly, vastly better than I, but there is that person who kind of struggles in silence, and from outward appearances appears to have it all in control, but ultimately is dealing with something that they can't find the space to articulate, or it's weighing them down in some way. So, that was kind of our path with it, just as blindsided as any human beings could possibly be. And I'm still left kind of searching for those very answers.
Yeah.
What would we have looked for or done differently? What was there something that we didn't see? Was something that seemed totally normal at the time not normal?
Yeah.
And I think, just again, for us personally, there is no resolution to that question. And that might not be the answer that anyone would really want to hear, but it is the truth of our experience. And I guess, to reflect on that, I think it just means that, I think the thing I would say is that you could just never assume, right? And when things first happen, people send you things and you get cards, or people find things on social media, which is even them finding ways to reach out. They're looking for ways to make contact and support, but don't have the words themselves. And someone at some point sent me this kind of like little, maybe it was an Instagram tile or whatever, and said, check on all your friends, even your happy friends. And in the moment, it made me really angry. I was like, man, we can't even trust that people are happy. But I reflected on that enormously. And like, like there can be we just can't assume. And I know certainly, as will happen, right? Like, I'm now part of this. I live in the world with this is incredible. A lot of people seek support groups and they go things like that. Like, I have 5 personal friends in my life that I've known that are having the same experience that we're having lost a child, that I just know in my life. We were not brought together by this happening. We were already in each other's lives.
Wow.
So we have this, kind of like support group amongst ourselves, and each of them has walked their own unique path with it.
Yeah.
And some folks had children who were more overtly struggling. They were on a path towards treatment, and some folks had children who were maybe on, paths to addiction and those kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, I think every individuals that have their own experience with it, and my personal experience falls in the you can never assume camp. So I couldn't say like, here's the thing. I know as much about what to look out for as anybody else would have read an article that told them to look out for those kind of things, or would be counseled by a professional as a parent. But yeah, my learning and my experience is just, you can, there are some things that you will simply never be allowed to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to,
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it really speaks to, I remember watching a documentary years ago called The Mask You Wear, or something like that, Mask You Live In, or something like that. And it was really about males, and it was really about how often we probably from, as you were mentioning, like toddlerhood, we kind of, grow into this sense of like, not telling people how we're really doing. And it's one of the reasons why I, as a therapist and even, personally push with people, share more, not less. You know what I mean? Like if it makes a person uncomfortable to say, hey man, how are you? You okay? Everything all right? Like if it makes them uncomfortable, I'd rather them be uncomfortable than not cared for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's my attitude toward it, because I feel like we've sort of strayed so much the other way that we're just going to sort of pretend and ignore and not pay attention to. And sometimes things happen. And, you have regrets about not just having the confidence to just say, hey, man, everything all right? Everything all right?
Yeah, that's a piece of my kind of presentation or talk track or whatever you want to say. Because when I try and share, like, okay, here's how you would do the shoulder check, I draw this distinction between a reflection and a regret, right? Like, and, there are times where, like, we're just not going to get it right. But knowing that we tried means we get to reflect on that, and we get to learn and grow from it. Whereas the other side of that coin is maybe not having tried or not having done the right thing. And that's the path to regret. And regret is heavy, man. Regret is something that's hard to put down. But even just sort of, because I think that's part of what shoulder check is about. And this is, again, like I'm probably borrowing in the marketing and advertising sense, people talk about behavior change. It's usually meant to buy a different product, as opposed to the cognitive behavior. That's right, where real behavior change. But ultimately, like, that is what, even if you want to just say shoulder check is, if you need to put it in a box, you could call it like an awareness campaign. It's ultimately meant to just the smallest bit, change behavior or perception or an idea to get to exactly what you're saying, like to make it okay to answer that question or to ask that question. I had the experience personally when we were going through the worst of it. A friend of mine had reached out via text, and he's like, hey man, I'm just checking in. I hope you're doing okay. Then, you receive lots of those every single day. But at this one moment, I needed to put something down, and I gave him back a text.
Yeah.
I saw the 3 dots come up. Go away. 3 dots come up, go away. Never got a reply. There's no way this gentleman expected the level I put back on him. And I like respect, right? Like he gave me permission to just air some stuff. It was great. It was more than he knew was coming at him. And I'm sure, what am I supposed to do with that? He didn't have to do anything. Even there, right? Like in the moment of like an incredibly acute moment where we were having trouble having that dialogue. But I think, I'm sure it'd be your experience as well. Like I'm on the other side of that divide, so to speak now. Like I live in a different place with respect to my emotionality, my willingness or ability to express it. If only because had I not found a way to do it for myself, like I was saying before, I'm sure like anything you push down is coming back out somehow. This is not the kind of thing that you can suppress, like what was our instinct in the immediate aftermath. Embrace is not a great word because it sounds positive, but you know what I mean. You just have to look to what this is and accept what this is. And it's not easy to do, but I think that's part of what the shoulder check is to us, right? Like it's of course a bit of therapy for us. It's figuring your hand to see positive outcomes, or to just like, you're saying, occasionally receive some kind of anecdotal feedback that says, this gave me permission to speak to my child, or this gave me permission to reach out to a teammate. Like, okay, that's the hand back on our shoulder, knowing that that's
amazing.
Some kind of contribution.
It's amazing, Rob. Well, I have to say, I mean, through our discussion and just hearing about, shoulder check, I too hope that perhaps it is September one day. And look, as you said, maybe it isn't about funding. Maybe it's about awareness. Maybe it's about because here's something that I put out a lot, and I want parents to hear this. Sometimes I'll hear from parents, whether it be a post that someone responds to or someone will say in my office, why all the attention? Why all the attention to mental health? Why are we even talking about it? And I thought about that a lot one day, and sort of the difference between our generation and theirs. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways I draw that line is I say, hey, if you have friends that are 40s, 50s, and 60s, you ask them. If you're at a gathering one day, ask them, when you were in high school, did you ever know anybody or hear about anybody that took their own life? And more often than not, they're going to say no. Right. You ask a kid that nowadays, not only will they say yes, they have a list.
Yeah.
That's how much it's changed.
Yeah. Well, I guess both as it relates to, obviously an upswing in total numbers, but then even more so the ability to talk about it now.
Right. Right.
Which my parallel on that one is I think back to same deal, right? Same generation when we were younger. Yeah. And I had a cousin who had cancer. And that was it wasn't something you talked about as much. And, certainly had amazing family around him. I'm not suggesting that he suffered in silence by any stretch, but we were not standing up to cancer. We were not championing people who have kind of fought, won, or lost that battle. And now we do, right? Like we honor them for what they're going through, for the heroism that is facing down something like that, right? Like that's where we're at with that conversation. And I think that's exactly the parallel for where we're at with this conversation, right? Like it's been there all along, but now we're recognizing it, and we are honoring the people that are struggling, and we need to champion them as well. We need to make them feel comfortable, supported, and all those things. And I'm sure 10 years hence, our shoulder check started in the world of hockey. Mm-hmm. And it's all, my son's network, because he was a good hockey player, right? And hockey as a community, as a great community, comes out, supports one another. The NHL has a program called Hockey Talks. It started with one franchise out on the West Coast, and now like 20 of the NHL franchises participate in it. And it's about exactly that, breaking the silence around the stigma. And we've participated in them with a lot of the NHL franchises, done with the Capitals, the Rangers, the Bruins, so on and so forth. But we're just kind of working up the, bit by bit, people saying like, hey, hold on a second. There is strength in being able to talk about this, which is even more, that's even, that's the right way to say it. The strength to talk about it is far greater than the strength to without saying something, right? And
no doubt,
we start to honor that, champion that bit by bit, like the conversation will just be brought more and more to the fore in a positive way.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I mean, whether you know this or not, I'm going to say it, Rob. The ripple effect shoulder check creates, you probably don't even know how many people you guys are touching and supporting and helping. So I commend you for all you do, all the energy you put forth. I also commend you for, taking this tragic situation and, flipping it and putting a scenario out there to help many, many others, not only today, but also in the future. So thank you for all that you do. And please, those of you that are listening, please look up Shoulder Check, get involved. Rob's a wonderful human being, and there's a lot of other people involved, I know. So please do your part and do what you can to support a wonderful organization. Rob, thank you so much for your time, your energy today. One last question. I'll put you on the spot. So normalize it forward. We're set up so that we want to continue the conversation, and part of continuing to do that as I ask people to nominate a friend, a coworker, a relative, and that's how we got connected, actually. So would love to put you on the spot and ask anybody in your world or your network you think would be helpful for me to interview going forward.
Yes, yeah. I'm going to point you towards a gentleman by the name of Jake Miskin, who is a filmmaker. And they just recently premiered their film called Shattered Ice.
Nice.
And the film is it's set in a fictitious town, but it's based on the town that he grew up in, Needham, Mass. that about 10 or 15 years ago went through having lost 5 of their community members. And he made this film to both tell the story of what happened, but also to really deliver on the exact same mission that we're on, which is to show people to use the arts, to use film as a means to help people talk about this kind of thing. So that film just debuted a little bit ago, and it's off to a really good start. And yeah, he's a really thoughtful guy who Shoulder Check are doing stuff, partnering with, and yeah, he would have a really cool, different perspective on using. You know, we're obviously anchored in sports. He's anchored in sports and arts and film, but all trying to just bring the message out.
Love it. I'll get his info from you offline, but I can't wait to connect with him. Sounds like he'll offer a great perspective for my listeners, and I think the more we get to talk about this, the better. So keep doing what you're doing, bud. I really appreciate and support you. And
well, I gotta say thank you to you for what you're doing here, and you're giving us the space and the platform, and to be able to share our message with you and with your audience is an incredible opportunity for us. So I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll talk soon.
Right on.
All right. See ya.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.